Hey friends, welcome back to Last Records. I'm Patrick, and today I'll be going over some of the most fatal pranks ever recorded. From a man who kept taunting a 472-pound lion for the laughs which went brutally wrong within moments, to a rubber snake prank that caused a driver to react in the most terrible way possible. It was February 20th, 2017, a Thursday afternoon on a private rural estate outside Sorocaba, São Paulo State, Brazil. The land ran to about 106 acres of red-earthed pasture and scrub. The main house sat on a rise at the center. A reinforced secondary structure sat about 260 feet to the north. Renato Figueiredo was 44 and had made his money in agricultural land brokerage. By his late 30s, he had accumulated enough to withdraw from active work entirely. He had loved lions since childhood. When he had enough money to act on it, he did not hesitate. Private ownership of big cats in Brazil was illegal outside licensed zoos and research facilities, though enforcement in remote rural areas was inconsistent. Renato had the land, the structure, and enough distance from anyone who might ask questions. The lion, a 4-year-old male Renato had named Simba, had been transported from the Paraguayan border through a cross-border arrangement. He weighed 472 pounds at his last recorded measurement. Renato photographed him regularly and posted images to a private social media account. Friends responded with a mixture of admiration and concern. I want to pause here for a second, because Renato had fired the one person on his property who actually knew what they were doing. Then he was alone out there with a 472-pound lion and a camera. I'm baffled. Over the year following the departure of his caretaker, Renato developed what he described to friends as a relationship with Simba. He had begun presenting meat at the feeding window, allowing Simba to approach, and then withdrawing it at the last moment before sliding it through. He filmed it several times. In one video, he laughed audibly as Simba's head snapped forward and found nothing. A friend commented that he was going to get himself killed. Renato replied with a laughing emoji. He had been doing it for 7 months. On that afternoon, Renato approached the enclosure at the usual feeding time, carrying about 6.5 pounds of raw beef. The heat was pushing 100 degrees. He raised the sliding panel and extended the meat into the opening. Simba came to the window. Renato pulled the meat back. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Simba did not follow the meat. He lunged forward and drove his head partially through the feeding window, his jaws closing on Renato's right arm at the mid-forearm. Both forearm bones fractured on contact. The lion pulled back through the opening, taking Renato's arm with it to the elbow before the angle of the window frame arrested the motion. Renato's screaming was heard at the main house by his housekeeper, who called emergency services at 3:14 p.m. Renato was conscious when first responders arrived, but in severe hemorrhagic shock. Simba had not released the arm. A veterinarian was dispatched from Sorocaba. The sedation process took 22 minutes from arrival to full effect. Renato was transported to hospital with a traumatic degloving injury from the mid-forearm to the wrist, complete fracture of both forearm bones, and vascular damage to the brachial artery. His surgical team described his condition as critical on arrival. He received emergency vascular surgery and was placed in intensive care. He died at 11:52 p.m. The cause of death was hemorrhagic shock secondary to traumatic vascular injury sustained in an animal attack. Authorities attended the property the following morning. Simba and 2 wildcats in an adjoining section were seized. Simba was euthanized on site. An investigation was opened into the origin and transport of the animals. 3 individuals connected to the cross-border brokerage were identified for questioning.
It was June 2017, and the afternoon sun blazed over a residential backyard in Mesa, Arizona. Heat radiated from the concrete pool deck surrounding a kidney-shaped swimming pool. The water's surface glittered under a cloudless sky, while a portable speaker played music across the property. Liam Chen was 31 years old and managed a casual dining restaurant chain location, overseeing daily operations, staff scheduling, and customer service for a facility that served approximately 400 guests per day. Standing 5'9" and weighing 170 pounds, Liam maintained an athletic build through regular gym attendance. College friends described him as competitive and image conscious. someone who consistently positioned himself as the reliable hero in any situation requiring action or intervention. That Saturday afternoon marked an informal reunion gathering with 8 college friends at a rented property. The pool measured 40 feet long, with depths ranging from 4 feet at the shallow end to 8 feet at the deep end. Multiple warning signs posted by the property management company specifically prohibited diving in shallow water. The rental agreement explicitly outlined pool safety rules, though the host later admitted nobody had reviewed the documentation carefully. The group had been drinking beer throughout the afternoon while floating on inflatable chairs and playing pool games. Around 3 in the afternoon, one friend decided to execute what he considered a harmless prank. He positioned himself in the shallow end, submerged his face underwater, and remained motionless for several seconds with his arms floating limply. Within moments, someone noticed and shouted that he wasn't moving. The group's attention focused immediately on the shallow end. Liam, positioned near the pool's far edge, hesitated for several seconds before reacting. Without verbal warning, Liam launched himself forward in a shallow, forceful headfirst dive from the pool deck toward the shallow end where his friend remained motionless. Multiple witnesses later described the dive as athletic and aggressive, with Liam's body fully extended and angled downward. His head struck the pool's concrete bottom with significant force in water approximately 4 feet deep. The impact produced a sharp, dull thud audible above the music and conversation. Liam's body went immediately limp, floating face down. A scalp laceration sustained on impact caused blood to spread through the water near his head. The friend executing the prank surfaced instantly, screaming. Others pulled Liam from the pool within seconds and laid him on the deck. He showed no purposeful movement and was not breathing normally. Rescue efforts, including CPR and assisted breathing, began immediately while emergency services were contacted. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and found Liam unresponsive with severe respiratory failure and unstable vital signs. He was transported under active resuscitation to a regional medical center, where physicians documented complete loss of neurological function. After consultation with family members, life support was withdrawn, and he was pronounced dead approximately 6 hours after the incident. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from a catastrophic fracture dislocation of the cervical spine at the C2 level caused by an axial load and hyperflexion injury, with complete spinal cord transection and associated brainstem trauma. The property owner later faced a wrongful death lawsuit that resulted in settlement and policy changes, and the pool was permanently removed from rental use and secured to prevent access. It was June 8, 2017. An evening light spread across an event center in Austin, Texas. Cars filled the parking lot as guests arrived, carrying wrapped gifts and balloons through the entrance. Daniel Morrison was 31 years old and worked as an architect at a commercial design firm in Austin. He had lived in the city for 9 years after moving there for his first job out of graduate school. His friends later described him as someone who enjoyed pranks and didn't mind being the target of jokes when things stayed lighthearted. The group of 23 friends had planned the surprise party for over a month. The event center was a private venue used for parties, weddings, and business gatherings. It had a main hall inside and an outdoor terrace that looked out over the city. The terrace was 40 feet long and 30 feet wide. A low stone wall ran along the outer edge and stood 3 feet high. Past the wall, the ground dropped down at a steep angle for about 18 feet before it flattened into a garden area below. The slope was covered with decorative rocks, small bushes, and small lights built into the ground. Daniel's birthday party was organized by his wife, Lauren Morrison, and his close friend group. The surprise element was carefully planned. Daniel believed he was attending a casual dinner with Lauren, but 35 guests were hiding in the event hall. 33-year-old Ryan Caldwell was part of the friend group and had known Daniel for 14 years. Ryan had a reputation for physical comedy and light pranks. At previous gatherings, Ryan had jumped out from hiding spots, pulled chairs away, or playfully shoved friends in low-risk situations. These pranks had always been received as harmless fun. On the evening of the party, guests arrived between 6:30 and 7. Ryan, along with 2 other friends, volunteered to wait on the outdoor terrace to add an extra element of surprise by appearing from an unexpected direction. Once Daniel and Lauren arrived at 7:17. As they approached the hall entrance, the lights inside came on, and guests revealed the surprise. Daniel reacted with genuine excitement and laughter. Ryan and the 2 other friends heard the commotion from the terrace and decided to enter through the terrace door to add to the moment. As Daniel reached the terrace doorway, Ryan placed both hands on Daniel's shoulders and pushed forward with a level of force he later said was similar to previous pranks. The push was intended as a surprise, causing Daniel to step forward unexpectedly. Daniel's position at the moment of the push placed him directly in line with the open terrace door. Rather than regaining balance inside the hall, his momentum carried him through the doorway and onto the terrace. His momentum carried him across the terrace surface toward the stone wall. Daniel's hips struck the stone at an awkward angle. The impact, combined with his forward momentum, caused his upper body to pivot over the wedge. He tried to grab the top of the wall to stop himself, and he managed to grip the stone surface briefly, but his weight and momentum were already beyond the balance point. His hands slipped from the stone, and he fell over the wall onto the slope. Daniel tumbled down the 18-foot slope, unable to control his descent. His body struck the decorative rocks and metal lighting fixtures multiple times during the fall. He came to rest at the bottom of the slope in the garden area, lying on his side and motionless. Paramedics arrived, and Daniel was unconscious with visible trauma to his head, neck, and back. He was then transported to the hospital. At the hospital, imaging revealed a fractured skull, traumatic brain injury, 3 fractured cervical vertebrae, and internal bleeding. Daniel was taken directly to surgery, but the severity of the head trauma resulted in massive brain swelling that could not be controlled. Daniel died during surgery due to traumatic brain injury and cervical spine fracture. Ryan Caldwell was questioned and provided a statement describing the push as a prank that had gone wrong. Daniel's family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit, which was settled privately. The event center was temporarily closed following the incident. Management later banned surprise entrances and physical pranks at all events. It was August 14, 2018. A convenience store on the south side of Houston sat under harsh fluorescent lights, its parking lot nearly empty as the night shift began. Caleb McMullen, an 18-year-old high school graduate, had spent the evening convincing 3 friends to stage a fake armed robbery. Caleb was known among his circle for dismissing real-world consequences and mocking anyone who took safety precautions seriously. He had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, spending most of his time escalating dares and filming reactions for social media attention. Friends described him as someone who constantly pushed boundaries, believing that nothing truly dangerous would happen to him personally. He often bragged about previous pranks that had gone unpunished and ridiculed people who warned him. For 2 days, Caleb had planned the prank meticulously, purchasing an airsoft pistol from a sporting goods store and spray painting it matte black to remove any orange safety markings. He insisted the group keep everything secret from Marcus to ensure an authentic reaction, dismissing concerns from 2 friends who said the plan was dangerous and stupid. Caleb argued that nobody would actually respond with violence to what was obviously a joke of friends. He refused to inform store management or consider that other customers might be present. Marcus had not received any robbery training, and the store had no official late-night security protocol, leaving him with no guidance on how to react. At 9:47 in the evening, Caleb and two friends entered the store. Security footage later showed the parking lot had 3 vehicles, including one belonging to a customer inside. Caleb held the spray-painted replica pistol concealed under his jacket as they walked through the automatic doors. Marcus stood behind the counter, organizing cigarette inventory. One friend hesitated near the entrance, visibly uncomfortable. Caleb moved forward confidently toward the register. Caleb suddenly pulled the replica from his jacket and raised it toward Marcus while shouting about a robbery. His voice carried the exaggerated aggression he had practiced. Marcus froze, hands raised, face showing genuine terror. What Caleb had not accounted for was the customer standing near the refrigerated section, a 34-year-old construction worker with a valid concealed carry permit who had stopped for beverages after his shift. The customer saw a young man pointing what appeared to be a firearm at the store clerk in an aggressive robbery. He drew his legally carried handgun and fired once within 2 seconds of perceiving the threat. The 9mm round struck Caleb in the left side of his chest. Caleb staggered backward 3 steps, the replica pistol clattering onto the tile floor. He collapsed near the candy display. One of his friends immediately screamed that the gun was fake and not real, but blood was already spreading rapidly across Caleb's shirt. The other friend fled toward the exit in panic, while Marcus ducked behind the counter, grabbing the store phone. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Caleb was unresponsive with weak pulse and severe hemorrhaging from the chest wound. He was transported to a regional trauma center where he was pronounced dead at 10:31 in the evening, despite emergency surgery attempts. Paramedics noted in their report that Caleb had lost a significant amount of blood and was unresponsive upon arrival, confirming the extreme rapidity of fatal internal hemorrhage from the wound. The medical examiner determined the bullet had penetrated the left lung and nicked the left ventricle of the heart, causing massive internal bleeding and cardiac failure. Death would have occurred within minutes, even with immediate surgical intervention. Police investigation confirmed the replica pistol was visually indistinguishable from a real firearm under the store's lighting conditions and stress of the moment. The shooter was not charged after prosecutors determined his actions constituted reasonable self-defense, given the circumstances he perceived.
It was July 4th, 2015, and the backyard sat on the edge of a quiet Texas suburb where the grass had gone dry and brittle from the summer heat. The air still held the weight of the afternoon sun. Fireworks were already going off in the neighborhood, the low thuds of mortars a few streets over, the occasional whistle and pop closer in. A small group of teenagers had gathered near a concrete patio with a cooler of cheap beer, a phone on a tripod, and a box of consumer-grade fireworks they had picked up from a roadside stand earlier that week. Corby Vish was 19. He worked part-time at a local auto shop and spent most of his weekends filming content with his friends for a small prank channel they had been building together. He had around 3,300 subscribers. Not much, but enough to matter to him. He was the kind of guy who liked being the one who went first, the one who took the hit for the joke. His friends laughed loudest when he did, and he had built a small identity around being the person who didn't flinch. That identity is the thing I keep coming back to, because it's what walked him into this. The plan that night was a version of a stunt they had done before. Hold a lit firecracker in the mouth briefly, then spit it out before it blew. They had pulled it off twice in earlier videos using weaker fireworks. This time, the box they had was a step up in power, with faster fuses. Nobody measured the difference. Nobody tested one first. They had all been drinking for a couple of hours by the time the camera went on, and their timing was already off in ways they couldn't feel yet. Honestly, the thing that hits me hardest about Corby isn't the firework, it's the countdown. His friends added one for dramatic effect, and that countdown is what locked him in. He couldn't bail without breaking the bit, and at 19, breaking the bit in front of your friends feels worse than the risk. He lit the fuse and placed the firecracker between his teeth. The countdown started. Somewhere around 3, he tried to say something. Maybe a joke, maybe a cue for the throw, and that small movement cost him a fraction of a second. The fuse on this one was burning faster than the ones they had used before. He wasn't working with the margin he thought he had. The firecracker detonated inside his mouth before his hand ever reached it. The damage was immediate and catastrophic. His jaw, teeth, and the soft tissue of his mouth took the full force of the blast at point-blank range. He dropped straight to the ground, hands moving to his face on reflex. Heavy bleeding started within seconds, and his airway began filling with blood and displaced tissue. The sounds coming from him were not speech. They were the wet, gurgling attempts at breathing that happen when the airway is compromised from the inside. His movements were brief and uncoordinated. His friends froze. The video recovered later showed several seconds of stunned silence before anyone moved. That delay mattered. One of them finally ran for a phone while the others tried to turn him onto his side, but nothing they could do at that moment was going to hold back what was happening inside his airway. Responders arrived to find him without effective breathing, with massive facial trauma and ongoing hemorrhage. They attempted resuscitation on the patio and continued en route. The damage to his airway made a clear intervention impossible. He was pronounced dead at a small local facility a short time later. Investigators reviewing the footage and the scene confirmed the cause of death was airway obstruction combined with severe blood loss, not the detonation itself. The firework had functioned normally. The faster fuse, the alcohol, the countdown, and the half-second delay from speaking were what closed the gap. The phone used to record the stunt shut off during the initial chaos, leaving the final seconds of the clip truncated when it was later reviewed. In the days after, the remaining fireworks from the same box were collected and turned over, never used, still sealed in their original packaging. It was May 26, 2017, a Friday night on a quiet residential street in Springfield, Missouri. The neighborhood was the kind where porch lights stayed off after 9, and dogs did not bother to bark at passing cars. Mr. David Hartley was 53 and had taught 10th and 11th grade English at a high school for 19 years. He was the kind of teacher students remembered, not because he was easy, but because he was present. He knew which students were struggling before they said anything. He stayed after class. His colleagues described him as steady. His students described him as someone who actually gave a damn. The Leaf tradition at a high school had been running for at least a decade. At the end of each school year, a group of senior students would select one teacher they respected, drive to that teacher's home late on a Friday night, and cover their entire front yard in leaves. Bags of them, sometimes dozens, collected over weeks. The goal was to arrive undetected, complete the job, and be gone before anyone noticed. If the teacher came out and caught them, the prank was over. Getting caught was the ending, not the escalation. Mr. Hartley had known about the tradition for years. By May of that year, he had started to suspect his turn was close. A few of his 11th grade students had been unusually pleasant in the weeks leading up to the end of term. One had asked with no obvious reason whether he lived far from school. He had smiled and said nothing. He told his wife about it that same week. He said he was looking forward to catching them. I've said before that the details that get me are never the big ones. It's always something small. And here it's this. He was looking forward to catching them. He was genuinely excited to be part of the prank. On that night, 6 11th grade students loaded 4 cars with 32 bags of dry leaves collected from parks and sidewalks across the district over the preceding 3 weekends. They drove separately and parked at staggered distances from Hartley's street on the quiet residential neighborhood where porch lights stayed off after 9 and dogs did not bother to bark at passing cars. They had agreed on silence, no phone flashlights, and a 10-minute maximum on the ground. 2 acted as lookouts. 4 went to work on the yard. By 11:40 p.m., they had emptied all 32 bags across the front lawn, the garden beds, and the path to the front door. The yard was completely buried. They were gathering the empty bags to leave when the porch light came on. Mr. Hartley appeared at the front door in sweatpants and a hoodie. He had been awake. He saw the figures on his lawn and immediately understood what was happening. He came down the front steps fast, calling out to them by name. The students scattered. Most ran toward the parked cars. One ran the wrong way toward the road end of the street and stopped at the corner under a streetlight, doubled over and looking back at him. Mr. Hartley ran toward that student. He was moving fast, still laughing, covering the sidewalk in long strides. He did not see the concrete curb drop at the edge of the driveway crossing. His leading foot came down expecting flat ground and found a step down of about 6 inches. His ankle folded. His body pitched forward and he went down hard, his chest and face hitting the road surface as he rolled off the curb and into the lane. A refrigerated freight truck traveling at the posted limit of 35 miles per hour had no time to stop. The driver felt the impact before he understood it. He pulled over about 400 feet past the point of collision and called 911 at 11:48 p.m. Paramedics arrived at 11:56 p.m. Mr. Hartley was deceased at the scene. The cause of death was catastrophic traumatic injury consistent with a heavy vehicle strike. The 6 students were identified within 48 hours. All cooperated, and none had a prior record. The investigation found no evidence of intent to cause harm. The inquest recorded the death as accidental. No charges were filed. The high school canceled its end-of-year assembly. His 11th grade class finished their final exams 11 days later. Supervised by a substitute teacher none of them knew, the student who had been standing at the corner under the streetlight did not return to school for the remainder of the term. The leaf tradition has not been repeated since. He was laughing when he fell. The kids were laughing. That's the part I couldn't shake. That the last sound he made in his life was probably a good one.
It was April 9th, 2014, when morning sun lit the red rock formations surrounding a popular hiking overlook outside Sedona, Arizona. The desert air was cool and still as trail dust settled along the narrow path. A guardrail marked the designated viewing area, beyond which the terrain dropped steeply. Tyler Brandt was 19 years old and had recently completed his freshman year at a state university, where he pledged a fraternity known for wealthy membership and exclusive social events. 5'11" and 155 pounds, he came from a middle-class background and worked 2 part-time jobs to afford fraternity dues. Former classmates described him as eager to prove himself among more affluent peers. That spring break morning, Tyler was hiking with 5 fraternity brothers on a trail system winding through red rock formations. The group reached a scenic overlook where the terrain dropped approximately 120 feet onto jagged rock below. The viewing area was protected by cable railings and posted warning signs restricting access beyond the barrier. The group had been drinking throughout the morning, carrying mixed drinks in water bottles. Though no one appeared heavily intoxicated, alcohol had accumulated over several hours. Fraternity members continued testing Tyler's loyalty through escalating challenges, a pattern that had persisted throughout his pledge period. At the overlook, attention shifted toward trust. One fraternity member asserted that a hidden ledge existed just beyond the visible edge, a claim supported by 2 others who showed images on their phones. Investigators later determined the story was fabricated and had no basis in the terrain. Tyler hesitated, approaching the edge and looking down. The drop appeared sheer and uninterrupted. The fraternity members continued to pressure him, questioning his courage and suggesting he lacked commitment to the group. They pointed to an open stretch of slick rock and dirt beyond the guardrail, roughly 40 feet from the protected area, claiming the ledge would become visible only after committing to the run. After several minutes of escalating peer pressure, Tyler stepped beyond the protective railing. The ground consisted of loose dirt and scattered gravel over smooth rock, sloping slightly downward toward the cliff edge. The others positioned themselves several yards back, with phone cameras raised, continuing to encourage him. Tyler began running. He accelerated across the open ground toward the edge. Roughly 15 feet from the drop, witnesses later reported his expression changed as he appeared to recognize there was no ledge. He tried to stop abruptly, his shoes losing traction on the loose surface as he leaned backward and windmilled his arms. His momentum carried him forward. He went over the edge, still upright, and disappeared from view. Seconds later, the sound of impact echoed up from the rocks below. The fraternity members rushed to the edge. Tyler's body was visible on the rocks, approximately 120 feet below, motionless. Several members called emergency services, while others began shouting and crying. Rescue personnel required nearly 2 hours to reach the location and recover Tyler's body using technical climbing equipment. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from catastrophic blunt force trauma, with injuries incompatible with life. Fatal fractures were present in the skull, spine, and multiple long bones, along with extensive internal organ damage, indicating death occurred at impact. The fraternity was immediately suspended from campus activities pending investigation, and the university permanently revoked its charter 4 months later. Tyler's family filed wrongful death lawsuits against the national organization and several individual members. The trail's managing authority later installed additional barriers and warning signage, restricting access to informal areas near the overlook to reduce future risk. It was April 3rd, 2021, at the offices of a production company in Seattle, Washington, when a workplace prank resulted in fatal consequences. The company was a media production firm that created training videos and corporate communications for clients in healthcare and technology sectors. 27-year-old Amanda Price worked as a production assistant and had been with the company for 3 years. She was organized, detail-oriented, and well-liked by her colleagues. Amanda had a severe peanut allergy that she had managed since childhood. The allergy was life-threatening, and she carried 2 EpiPen auto-injectors at all times, one in her purse and one in her desk drawer at work. Her co-workers were aware of her condition. The company was producing a training video about emergency medical responses. The script included a scene demonstrating proper use of an epinephrine auto-injector during an allergic emergency. For the scene, the crew used a non-functional training auto-injector from a medical supply company. The prop EpiPen looked identical to a real one, but contained no medication and had no needle. The packaging clearly marked it for training use only. That afternoon, Jason Wright and Sarah Chen were organizing props in the equipment. Both were crew members working on the video. They began joking about pranking Amanda, and Jason suggested actually swapping Amanda's real EpiPen with the prop as a prank. They would tell her later that day and watch her reaction, then immediately return her real one. Later in the day, while Amanda was in a meeting, Jason and Sarah went to her desk. They opened her drawer and replaced her backup EpiPen with the prop. At 4:15, both were called into an unexpected meeting that lasted 90 minutes. By the time it ended, Amanda had left for the day with the fake prop EpiPen. Jason and Sarah decided they would return the real EpiPen first thing next morning, not considering it urgent since Amanda had another EpiPen in her purse. Amanda stopped at a grocery store on her way home and bought some crackers. She did not realize the crackers had been produced in a facility that also processed peanuts, and investigators later noted the possibility of trace peanut contamination. Within minutes, Amanda began experiencing allergic reaction symptoms. Her throat felt tight, breathing became difficult, and she developed hives. She reached for her purse, but realized she had left it in her car earlier that evening. With her breathing worsening, Amanda ran to get her backup medication. She removed the safety cap from the backup injector and pressed it firmly against her thigh, expecting the familiar needle click. Nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. The prop EpiPen had no needle and no medication. Amanda's allergic reaction progressed rapidly. She managed to dial 911 at 9:41, but she could not speak clearly due to throat swelling. The dispatcher heard labored breathing and immediately dispatched paramedics. Paramedics arrived at 9:53. They found her unconscious on the floor. Paramedics began resuscitation efforts, administered epinephrine, and transported her to the hospital. Despite aggressive treatment, including additional epinephrine, IV fluids, and steroids. Amanda had experienced prolonged oxygen deprivation before treatment began. She was pronounced dead at 10:36. Police investigated the next morning. Jason and Sarah confessed to the prank and were arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. The jury found them guilty. Jason received 8 years in prison and Sarah received 7 years. The company implemented strict policies prohibiting prop handling near personal medical items. It was October 9th, 2014. The fluorescent lights hummed in the parking garage beneath a commercial office building in Johannesburg, South Africa. Joshua Masiko, a 29-year-old accounts coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm, had just finished his shift. His co-workers lingered near their vehicle, watching him approach with an unusual level of attention. What appeared to be casual Friday afternoon banter would become a workplace tragedy that exposed the dangerous escalation of office culture gone wrong. Joshua had built his reputation at the logistics company over 5 years through competent work and relentless practical jokes. He regularly trapped colleagues in supply closets, hid personal belongings, including phones and car keys, and staged elaborate jump scares using masks and sudden noises. Managers had received multiple complaints, but Joshua dismissed critics as oversensitive and continued his behavior. He prided himself on pushing boundaries, often telling coworkers they were too soft about workplace humor and needed to learn how to take a joke. That afternoon, 5 coworkers implemented their plan to mirror Joshua's signature prank style. They had discussed teaching him a lesson by staging a fake kidnapping scenario, believing a brief scare would make him understand how his targets felt. The logistics firm had recently issued warnings about workplace conduct following a previous incident where Joshua had locked a colleague in a storage freezer for nearly 20 minutes. But no formal disciplinary action had been taken. When Joshua reached his vehicle around 5:30 in the afternoon, 3 co-workers grabbed him, while 2 others recorded on their phones for proof of the prank. Joshua initially struggled, but quickly began laughing. Recognizing the mimicry of his own tactics, he made jokes as they bundled him into the trunk of a coworker's sedan, assuming the experience would last only a minute or two. The group had not planned beyond getting him into the trunk. To enhance realism and muffle any shouting, one coworker started the engine and suggested leaving it running. The parking garage's ventilation system was operating, but someone had pulled the sedan into an isolated small service bay with a heavy maintenance door, and another coworker shut this door completely, cutting off airflow. The group moved to a different level to wait, planning to return after 5 minutes. The colorless, odorless gas is produced by vehicle engines and displaces oxygen in enclosed spaces. At concentrations above 70 parts per million, symptoms begin within hours. Above 400 parts per million, which occurs rapidly in sealed garages with running engines, unconsciousness happens within minutes and death follows quickly. 7 minutes passed before they returned to the service bay. Opening the maintenance door released a wave of exhaust fumes. They immediately opened the trunk and found Joshua unconscious and unresponsive. One coworker called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes but could not revive him. His skin showed the characteristic cherry red discoloration often seen in carbon monoxide poisoning. Police seized the phones and vehicle for forensic examination, extracting the original files and metadata from the recordings to preserve the timeline of events. The medical examiner's report was straightforward. Joshua had inhaled carbon monoxide at lethal concentrations that prevented oxygen from reaching his brain and heart. The binding of carbon monoxide to his blood cells caused cellular suffocation. Time of death was estimated at approximately 5:38 in the afternoon based on symptom progression and forensic analysis. All 5 coworkers faced criminal charges, including culpable homicide. Investigators documented Joshua's history of similar pranks, noting a pattern of escalating workplace behavior that management had failed to address. The logistics company faced civil liability for inadequate intervention despite previous complaints.
It was June 9th, 2021, a Wednesday afternoon, inside a single-story brick home in Liège, Belgium. The curtains in the front room were half drawn against the afternoon heat. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The television was on in the corner, volume low, tuned to a daytime program nobody was watching. Raymond Sellers was 68 and had been home for 11 days after spending 3 weeks at the hospital following an ischemic stroke. The stroke had left him with partial paralysis down his left side, reduced grip strength in both hands, and a speech pattern that required effort to produce clearly. His doctors said meaningful recovery was possible with physiotherapy and rest. What he needed above everything else was stillness and the complete avoidance of physical or emotional stress. His daughter had converted the front sitting room of their single-story brick home in Liège into a temporary bedroom so he would not need to navigate stairs. He spent most of his day in a hospital-grade wheelchair, moving between the sitting room and the back garden, where he liked to sit in the late afternoon. Raymond had always been the kind of grandfather who engaged. Backyard games, card games at the kitchen table, bad jokes delivered with complete commitment. The teenagers had grown up with that version of him. Seeing him in the wheelchair was an adjustment none of them spoke about directly. Let me be real here. I know how it feels being ill and having a support system. Raymond was actually enjoying it. Kobe Renshaw was 16 and Raymond's grandson. His teachers described him as easily distracted, but good-natured. He spent considerable time watching prank content online and owned a small handheld novelty shock device bought from a joke shop 4 months earlier. He had used it on 3 friends at school and once on his younger sister. None of them had been seriously affected. On that afternoon, Raymond was sitting in his wheelchair near the back door facing the garden. He had been in good spirits that day. He had eaten lunch without difficulty and had been more talkative than usual. Kobe had been sitting with him for 20 minutes, showing him videos on his phone, including the shock device pranks, and Raymond had laughed at 2 of them, the laugh coming out slower and more effortful than it used to, but genuine. Kobe retrieved the shock device from his hoodie pocket and held it against the back of Raymond's right hand and triggered it. Raymond's body jolted sharply in the chair. His head snapped back. For 2 or 3 seconds, he made a sound that was almost a laugh. Kobe was already grinning, pulling the device back. Then Raymond's expression changed. The color left his face immediately. His breathing became uneven. His left hand slid from the armrest. His head dropped forward. His body listed to the right and the wheelchair, which had not been locked, rolled slightly. He went sideways out of the chair and down onto the tiled floor before Kobe could reach him. Kobe shouted for his mother. She found Raymond on the floor, conscious but unable to respond properly to her voice, his breathing shallow and irregular. She called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes. His blood pressure was critically elevated, and he was showing signs consistent with a second acute cerebrovascular event. Doctors later believed the sudden panic and stress response had likely triggered a dangerous spike in blood pressure in a patient whose vascular system was already severely compromised from the earlier stroke. He was transported to a university hospital under emergency conditions. He died later that evening. The cause of death was determined to be a second ischemic stroke occurring in the context of severe pre-existing cerebrovascular damage and acute cardiovascular stress. Kobe was interviewed by police with his parents present. He surrendered the device and described what he had done without minimizing it. He had not known. That was the consistent and uncontested finding. No charges were filed. Raymond's wheelchair remained in the back room for weeks after the funeral, still facing the garden where the flowers had just come into bloom.
It was August 17th, 2018, at a downtown Portland parking structure that served the surrounding business district. The evening air was cooling as workers departed for the night. Fluorescent lights flickering across oil-stained concrete. The structure's 7 levels spiraled upward with tight corners and low clearance barriers. Jessica Carmine was 23 years old and worked as a paralegal assistant at a regional law firm, processing documents and managing case files for attorneys handling civil litigation. She had graduated 18 months earlier with a criminal justice degree and maintained an active interest in true crime media, spending evenings listening to podcasts and watching documentary series about unsolved abductions and violent crimes. Friends later described her as cautious to the point of paranoia, particularly regarding personal safety in parking areas. Her boyfriend of 14 months, Evan Morales, was 26 years old and worked as a marketing coordinator. He had spent 2 weeks planning an elaborate marriage proposal. His idea involved staging a fake kidnapping scare in which 2 friends wearing ski masks would confront Jessica near her vehicle before quickly revealing a romantic proposal setup nearby with flowers and candles. He had shared the plan with friends who expressed concern, but he dismissed their objections, convinced the surprise would be harmless. That Thursday evening, Jessica finished work around 6:30 and walked to her vehicle on the structure's 5th level. The area was mostly empty, with fewer than a dozen cars remaining. As she approached her sedan with keys in hand, 2 masked figures emerged from behind a concrete support pillar approximately 15 feet away. Both moved quickly toward her without speaking. Jessica's reaction was immediate and primal. She dropped her belongings and ran in the opposite direction, her breathing rapid and panicked. The 2 friends hesitated briefly before following at a distance, attempting to stop her, but she did not slow or turn back. She sprinted toward what she believed was the main elevator area, but instead entered a stairwell marked for emergency exit. The door closed behind her as she descended, taking the stairs 2 at a time. At the 3rd level landing, she pushed through an exit door that opened onto an exterior vehicle exit ramp adjacent to the structure. A delivery truck was accelerating up the ramp at that moment, preparing to merge into evening traffic. Jessica emerged directly into the driving lane without looking. The driver had no time to react. Impact occurred at approximately 25 to 30 miles per hour, throwing her body roughly 15 feet before it struck a concrete barrier. Multiple witnesses, including the 2 men involved in the prank, called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes and found Jessica with catastrophic head injuries and minimal signs of life. She was transported during resuscitation efforts to a regional trauma center, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury with skull fractures and extensive intracranial hemorrhaging, with additional rib fractures and internal organ damage contributing to rapid deterioration. Evan was later charged in connection with the incident and accepted a plea agreement that included probation and community service. Following the investigation, the parking structure's management installed additional warning signage and added physical barriers at emergency exits to prevent similar incidents. It was September 5th, 2016, at a residential home in Bakersfield, California. The 2-story house sat on a quiet suburban street with few cars passing by. Eric Sullivan was 28 years old and worked as an electrician in Bakersfield. He had lived in his 2-story house for 4 years. His girlfriend, Melissa Park, was 26 years old and worked as a teacher. They had been together for 2 years. Eric's younger brother, Jordan, was visiting from Phoenix for the weekend. Eric and Jordan had pranked each other since they were kids. Each brother tried to make his pranks bigger and better than the last one. The prank Eric and Melissa planned had taken 3 weeks to prepare. The idea was to make Jordan think a stalker was watching the house. They would leave fake clues, make strange things happen, and build up fear over the whole weekend. On Sunday, they would tell Jordan it was all fake. Eric and Melissa made fake photos that showed a dark figure outside the house. They wrote threatening letters, and they planned to make scary phone calls at specific times during the weekend. Jordan arrived Friday evening at 6:30. The prank began Saturday morning when Eric showed Jordan a fake photograph of someone in their backyard at night. Throughout Saturday, Eric and Melissa added elements: a threatening letter, mysterious phone calls, and moved household items. By evening, Jordan was visibly unsettled and suggested calling the police, but Eric dismissed the idea. That night, Eric staged sounds outside at 2 in the morning. Jordan woke to scratching noises and came out looking clearly frightened. Sunday morning, Eric escalated with more fake evidence. Jordan became increasingly anxious and insisted they contact authorities, but Eric delayed. At 2 in the afternoon on Sunday, Eric decided to add the final major escalation. He told Jordan that he and Melissa were going to the hardware store to buy better locks and asked Jordan to stay at the house and call immediately if anything suspicious happened. Jordan agreed reluctantly. Eric and Melissa did go to the hardware store, but their actual plan was to have their friend, 30-year-old Keith Yamamoto, appear at the house while they were gone. Keith was instructed to dress in dark clothing and wear a ski mask, appear briefly in the backyard where Jordan would see him, then quickly leave. This would create the climax before Eric and Melissa returned to reveal the prank. Keith arrived at the house and entered through the back gate, which Eric had left unlocked for him. Jordan was in the living room, which had large windows with a clear view of the backyard. Jordan saw Keith through the window. His reaction was immediate fear. He called 911, reporting an intruder wearing a mask. Jordan then made a fatal decision. Eric kept a handgun secured in a safe in the master bedroom closet for home protection. Jordan, who was already familiar with the safe from prior visits, retrieved the gun, checked that it was loaded, and returned to the living room. He unlocked the back door and stepped onto the patio. Moments later, Keith was struck by 2 gunshots and collapsed. Jordan ran to Keith and pulled off the ski mask, recognizing him as Eric's friend. Police and paramedics arrived within 3 minutes. Paramedics began treatment, but Keith died at the scene from his wounds. Jordan was arrested and gave a statement describing the weekend of staged threats. Eric and Melissa arrived home to find police surrounding the house, and Eric later provided evidence of the planned prank. Jordan was charged with manslaughter, and the case concluded with a plea agreement in which he received a suspended sentence after the court determined he had acted out of genuine fear created by deliberate deception. It was July 22, 2017. The morning traffic through Berlin's Mitte district moved steadily as commuters navigated the narrow streets connecting residential neighborhoods to the city center. Lucas Lehman, a 34-year-old accountant, pedaled his bicycle through the same route he had taken for 6 years, timing his departure to avoid the worst congestion. Lucas was methodical about everything. His colleagues at a mid-sized financial services firm described him as punctual and risk-averse, someone who planned vacation days months in advance and always double-checked his work. He cycled year-round, rain or shine, preferring the predictability of his route over the crowded subway system. His bicycle was well-maintained, his helmet always secured properly, and he followed traffic laws with the precision he applied to balance sheets. Urban cycling in Berlin's inner districts requires constant awareness of parked cars, pedestrians, and delivery vehicles sharing narrow streets, where bike lanes often disappear at intersections and cyclists must merge with traffic moving at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour in some areas. That morning, 2 content creators had set up near the bike lane to film a prank video for their online channel. They had positioned themselves on the sidewalk adjacent to the cycling path, planning to stage a heated argument that would escalate into physical shoving. The concept was simple: create a realistic-looking confrontation that would surprise passers-by and capture their reactions. No permits had been obtained, and no warning signs were posted. They began filming around 8:10 in the morning, during peak commuter hours when foot and bicycle traffic was heaviest. The performers started their staged altercation just as Lucas approached. One shoved the other forcefully, causing him to stumble backward toward the bike lane, while both shouted loudly. The sudden movement and aggressive shouting created the illusion of a genuine assault unfolding directly in Lucas's path. Other cyclists had already passed without incident, but the timing placed Lucas at the worst possible moment. Lucas braked instinctively, but could not stop quickly enough. Faced with what appeared to be a violent confrontation spilling into his lane, he made a split-second decision to swerve left, moving out of the bike lane entirely. He veered directly into the adjacent traffic lane without looking behind him. A delivery truck, approaching from behind at roughly 30 to 35 miles per hour hit him hard. The impact threw Lucas forward, his body colliding with the truck's front bumper before being thrown onto the pavement. His certified commuter helmet, strap fastened, split along one seam. Forensic photos later showed deformation consistent with a high-speed blunt impact. The truck driver immediately stopped and called emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes. But Lucas was unconscious and unresponsive. He was transported to a nearby hospital trauma center where he died 40 minutes later from severe brain trauma and multiple spinal fractures caused by blunt force impact. The content creators immediately ceased filming and provided statements to police. Police recovered the creators' footage, multiple bystander phone videos, and a forward-facing dash cam from the truck. Dash cam footage from the delivery truck confirmed Lucas had swerved suddenly into traffic. Witnesses verified the prank had caused the cyclist to panic and change course abruptly. Both performers faced charges for negligent homicide and creating a public hazard. The case sparked debates about unregulated street performance and social media prank culture. The bike lane was later redesigned with physical barriers separating cyclists from vehicle traffic. It was January 14th, 2016, on Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota. Clear skies and 8 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures masked unstable ice conditions near the shoreline, where pressure ridges and recent temperature shifts had left sections dangerously thin. Blake Carver was 21, a comedy content creator from Minneapolis who enjoyed filming elaborate physical challenges and pranks with his friends. He had been inspired by various internet challenges and wanted to create his own unique version that would showcase both humor and physical endurance. Carver frequently incorporated water-based stunts into his content. The clear morning provided good visibility across the frozen lake, though glare off the ice surface made it difficult to assess conditions accurately. Carver had planned to film his version of the Polar Bear Challenge, but decided to make it more interesting by wearing ankle weights to add difficulty to pulling himself out of the water. He brought a waterproof GoPro camera and ankle weights totaling 15 pounds that he regularly used for pool workouts. Carver had seen ice safety warnings posted around the lake, but proceeded with the stunt despite the posted advisories. His friend Jake remained on shore to record while Carver prepared to begin the stunt. Carver began recording while strapping on the ankle weights, demonstrating the added equipment before entering the water. He secured the weights with their standard Velcro straps, the same way he wore them during his regular pool training sessions. The weights were designed for aquatic fitness and featured standard quick-release closures. Carver selected his entry point based on visual appeal rather than ice safety, choosing an area where broken ice chunks created interesting formations for his background. Multiple warning signs about thin ice were visible in the area, but Carver focused on the dramatic visual elements rather than safety considerations. Jake's shore camera captured the warning signs clearly in the background. Carver jumped into the 28-degree Fahrenheit water with the ankle weights attached. The immediate cold shock caused involuntary gasping and rapid breathing. The underwater GoPro captured several seconds of chaotic footage showing bubbles, fragmented views of his legs, and disoriented movement before the camera angle shifted wildly. The 15 pounds of additional weight pulled him deeper than he had experienced in pool training, and the ice shelf he had planned to grab for support broke away under his weight. The underwater footage became increasingly erratic, capturing brief flashes of his hands near his ankles, the underside of the ice, and streams of bubbles from uncontrolled breathing before settling into a dark, sediment-filled view. Jake remained recording for several seconds before recognizing that Carver had failed to resurface, a delay investigators later described as consistent with prank-style challenge recordings. Jake signaled for assistance from the shoreline while continuing to record. The shore footage showed the broken ice area where Carver had entered, with no movement visible at the surface. Emergency divers recovered Carver's body with the ankle weights still attached to his legs, including one strap that had been partially peeled back. Investigators noted the partial release was consistent with an attempted removal during rapid cold-induced loss of manual dexterity. The underwater footage was largely unusable due to chaotic camera movement and poor visibility, though it showed the initial cold shock response and disoriented movement. Multiple warning signs about thin ice were clearly visible in Jake's shore footage. The investigation report noted that the combination of cold shock response, additional weight, and unstable ice conditions created a situation from which escape was nearly impossible. Cause of death was drowning, with cold shock incapacitation listed as a contributing factor occurring within seconds of immersion.
It was October 31st, 2019, Halloween night, on a suburban street in Naperville, Illinois. The neighborhood was active in patches, porch lights left on for passing children, small groups moving between properties with bags already heavy by 7 in the evening. Sienna Hartley was 34 and worked at a radiology clinic. She had finished her shift 2 hours earlier than expected and driven home in good spirits, already thinking about the night. She and her husband Dane had been together for 9 years, married for 5. He was not easy to scare. She had tried before and he had laughed both times before she had even finished setting up. He had a way of seeing things coming. She decided this time would be different. Sienna changed into a full-length white dress she had bought for a costume party 2 years earlier and applied pale theatrical makeup across her face and hands. She pulled a sheer white fabric over her head that partially obscured her features. She texted her closest friend, Brooke Sanderson, 29, and explained the plan. Brooke agreed immediately. "I have to be honest, the planning in this one is what gets me." She had put real thought into this. She wanted to finally get him, and she did. Dane was 36 and worked as a site supervisor for a civil construction company. He arrived home at 6:48 p.m., changed, and was sitting in the living room with a beer when his phone rang at 7:15 p.m. It was Brooke. She told him there had been an incident, that Sienna had been in a minor accident on the way home from a dinner she had supposedly been attending, that she was shaken but okay and needed him to come quickly to an address 2 suburbs over. She used a tone of controlled urgency she had practiced once in the car before calling. Dane was out the front door in under 2 minutes. Sienna had been lying flat across the back seat of his car for just over 20 minutes. She had climbed in through the rear passenger door while he was inside changing, pulling the door to without fully latching it to avoid the sound. Dane, already rushing after hearing Brooke's call, never walked around the vehicle before getting in. As he drove, his attention stayed fixed on the navigation screen and the repeated calls Brooke sent to keep him moving quickly. The angle of the driveway and the height of the rear seats kept her out of view from the front. She heard him unlock the car and get in. Dane reversed out of the driveway and pulled onto the street, driving with urgency, phone mounted on the dash with the address already loaded in navigation. He merged onto the main road and accelerated to the posted limit of 35 miles per hour. Sienna waited until he had been driving for approximately 90 seconds. Then she slowly raised herself upright in the back seat and reached one hand forward, placing it on his right shoulder. Dane reacted before he could think. His body twisted sharply to the right, his hands pulling the wheel with it. The car crossed the center line. He overcorrected left. The vehicle lost stability and rotated, the passenger side striking a parked van on the opposite curb, before continuing into a utility pole and coming to rest. Sienna was unrestrained in the back seat. The impact threw her forward and then sideways. Her head struck the doorframe before she came to rest on the floor behind the driver's seat. She did not make a sound after that. Dane was conscious. His airbag had deployed. He had a laceration across his forearm and a deep bruise forming across his sternum from the seatbelt. He turned around and found her on the floor, still in the white dress. She was breathing. He called 911 at 7:21 p.m. Paramedics arrived at 7:28 p.m. Sienna was extracted and transported to hospital with a severe traumatic brain injury consistent with blunt force impact. She underwent emergency surgery that night. She died on November 3rd, 4 days later, without having regained consciousness. The cause of death was severe traumatic brain injury sustained during the collision. Dane was treated at the scene for minor injuries and interviewed by police the following morning. Brooke was also interviewed. Both gave full accounts. The investigation found no evidence of criminal offending. The coroner recorded the death as accidental. Dane did not return to the house for 6 weeks. When he did, the plastic skeletons were still zip-tied to the mailboxes on either side of his driveway. The neighbors had forgotten to take them down.
It was November 22nd, 2015, and the living room of a suburban New Jersey split-level home was filled with extended family. Afternoon light filtered through half-closed blinds as conversations overlapped across couches and folding chairs crowded with relatives. The lingering smell of roasted turkey drifted in from the kitchen, while a football game played quietly on the television. Dorothy Weston was 67 years old and had recently retired after 41 years, working as an intensive care nurse within a regional hospital network. Her career involved managing critically ill patients and enforcing strict medication protocols. Family members described her as clinically precise but increasingly rigid about her own health management. She openly opposed what she believed was recreational drug culture, particularly marijuana legalization, which she always preached the underestimated medical risks of, despite shifting public attitudes. That Sunday afternoon marked the family's extended Thanksgiving gathering, with approximately 15 relatives present. Dorothy's grandson, Ethan Weston, was 21 years old and a community college student, and had brought a tray of brownies he claimed were made from a family recipe. Unbeknownst to Dorothy, the brownies had been prepared using concentrated cannabis-infused butter, with each serving containing a high dose of THC. Investigators later learned Ethan believed the edible would help his grandmother relax and reconsider her views. Dorothy took daily medication for hypertension and atrial fibrillation, including a beta blocker and a prescription anticoagulant. She had casually mentioned her medication routine earlier in the afternoon. Her grandson was aware of her prescriptions, but had not researched the physiological risks cannabis could pose to older adults with underlying cardiac conditions. Dorothy consumed one brownie around 3 o'clock while watching the game. She remarked that it tasted unusual, but finished it. Within about 40 minutes, relatives noticed she had become quiet and withdrawn. Her responses grew confused and disorganized, and her speech became slurred when addressed directly. By 4:30, her condition had worsened noticeably. She struggled to stand without assistance and appeared increasingly disoriented. Her daughter, a physician assistant, recognized signs of severe intoxication and questioned what Dorothy had eaten. The grandson initially denied adding anything unusual, but admitted the truth after the remaining brownies were discovered. Emergency services were called at 4:38. Dorothy's blood pressure dropped sharply, and her heart rhythm became unstable. She lost consciousness while paramedics were en route. Responders arrived within 12 minutes and found her unresponsive with a weak, irregular pulse and profound hypotension. Advanced life support measures were initiated, and she was transported to a nearby emergency department. Despite aggressive efforts to stabilize her cardiovascular status, she developed a malignant arrhythmia and suffered complete cardiovascular collapse approximately 2 hours after arrival. Resuscitation attempts continued for 40 minutes without success. She was pronounced dead at approximately 7:40 p.m. The medical examiner determined that Dorothy died from a fatal cardiac arrhythmia related to underlying atrial fibrillation and cardiovascular disease, with cannabis intoxication listed as a contributing factor. Toxicology confirmed elevated THC levels consistent with ingestion of a high-dose edible, which investigators concluded precipitated severe hypotension and cardiac instability in a medically vulnerable patient. Ethan was charged with reckless endangerment and food tampering, and later accepted a plea agreement resulting in a felony conviction, probation, and mandatory community service. The incident permanently fractured the family, with several relatives severing contact in the aftermath. It was March 14, 2019. An afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across a shopping plaza in Sacramento, California. Shoppers moved between stores in the outdoor plaza that had 42 stores around a central courtyard. Marcus Diaz was 26 years old and worked as a social media content creator in Sacramento. He had traveled to the plaza with his friend Jessica on a Thursday afternoon to film a prank video for his online channel. His friend later described him as someone who viewed public spaces as stages and pedestrian reactions as performance material when denied caution. The prank was a fake kidnapping reaction test meant to capture how strangers reacted to a staged abduction. Marcus planned to grab his friend Jessica and drag her toward a van while she screamed for help as two others filmed from different angles. The scene was expected to last only a few minutes before being revealed to anyone who stepped in. Marcus and his team arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon on a Thursday. Jessica wore a bright yellow jacket to make her visible on camera. The two camera operators positioned themselves at opposite ends of the courtyard with their equipment ready. 41-year-old Robert Patterson was at the plaza that afternoon shopping for groceries. Robert had served 8 years in the military as an infantry soldier and had completed 2 deployments overseas before returning to civilian life in 2012. He worked as a construction supervisor and lived in Sacramento with his wife and 2 children. Robert was walking out of a hardware store when he heard Jessica screaming as Marcus dragged her towards the van. Her shouts were loud and clearly audible across the plaza. Several shoppers turned to look. Some stopped walking, and a few took out their phones. Robert did not see the camera. He immediately ran toward them. Marcus was focused on the performance and did not notice Robert approaching from behind until Robert reached him. Robert grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and pulled him away from Jessica with significant force, causing Marcus to lose his grip and stumble. Marcus, confused, tried to explain, but Robert interpreted the explanation as excuses and moved to restrain him. Marcus pushed back against Robert's hold, trying to create space to explain the prank, but Robert responded with a defensive strike to Marcus's chest and followed with a takedown maneuver that brought both men to the pavement. Marcus landed hard on his back with Robert's weight on top of him. The impact knocked the air from his lungs and caused immediate pain in his upper back. One of the camera operators reached them within seconds, saying it was a prank and pointing to his camera. Robert, hearing the explanation, released his hold on Marcus and stepped back. Plaza security arrived 2 minutes later, followed by police. By this time, Marcus was sitting on a bench with clear signs of distress, reporting chest pain and difficulty breathing. An ambulance was called, and paramedics evaluated Marcus on scene. He had visible bruising, an elevated heart rate, and shallow breathing. At the medical center, imaging revealed 2 fractured ribs and a punctured lung that required immediate treatment with a chest tube. A second procedure addressed internal bleeding. Despite treatment, Marcus's condition worsened overnight as complications from the lung injury led to respiratory failure. He died early the following morning. Investigators later determined that the blunt force impact during the takedown caused the chest trauma that proved fatal. Robert Patterson was questioned but not charged, as authorities concluded he had acted in response to what he believed was an active abduction. It was May 3, 2016. The evening air in Seoul's Gangnam district was warm and still, apartment windows glowing with yellow light as residents settled into their Tuesday night routines. Han Jun-seo, a 21-year-old business student, returned to his 6th-floor shared apartment after classes, unaware that what should have been another ordinary evening with his 3 roommates would end horribly. Jun-seo was in his 3rd year at a private university, studying marketing while working part-time at a convenience store to help cover rent. His roommates described him as easygoing and perpetually good-humored, the type who laughed off minor annoyances and never took offense. He'd grown up in Busan before moving to Seoul for school, sharing the cramped 650-square-foot apartment with fellow students he'd met through a university housing board. The balcony, where they often smoked and talked, overlooked a narrow courtyard lined with parked vehicles. The railing stood just 38 inches high, below many modern commercial safety standards of 42 inches. Late-night pranks had become routine entertainment in the apartment. Previous weeks had featured fake spiders, jump scares, and harmless tricks that provoked brief shouts followed by laughter. That evening, Jun Seo's roommates decided to stage an elaborate ghost prank involving dimmed lights, pre-recorded scratching sounds, and a dining chair rigged with line threaded through ceiling hooks. The plan required Jun Seo to stand near the balcony while they manipulated the chair from an adjacent room, making it appear to move on its own. The setup took nearly an hour. One roommate positioned speakers behind furniture, while another secured the line and tested the chair's movement. They deliberately chose the balcony area because the confined space would amplify Jun Seo's reaction, making the prank more effective for the video they intended to record afterward. But no footage of the actual fall exists. Nobody considered the proximity to the railing or questioned whether startling someone near a sixth-floor ledge presented obvious dangers. Jun Seo had returned from the convenience store at 9:45 in the evening, tired from a double shift. By 10:30 in the evening, everything was ready. The roommates convinced Jun Seo to step onto the balcony under the pretense of checking a noise outside. He stood roughly 2 feet from the railing, facing inward toward the apartment. Lights dimmed, the scratching sounds began playing. Then one roommate yanked the line hard, causing the chair to jerk violently across the floor toward Jun Seo. The sudden movement triggered exactly the reaction they'd wanted. Jun Seo flinched backward instinctively, his arms raised defensively. His right heel struck the low railing at an awkward angle. The metal bar caught him just below the knee, and momentum carried his upper body over the edge before his hands could grab anything. He dropped silently into darkness. The impact came in 2 stages. His body struck the roof of a parked sedan directly below, the metallic crunch audible throughout the courtyard. The force deflected him onto the pavement between vehicles, where he landed face down. A neighbor in the building across the courtyard, standing on her own balcony, witnessed the entire fall and immediately dialed emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, but pronounced Jun Seo dead at the scene. The medical examiner's report identified catastrophic skull fractures and chest injuries, including multiple rib fractures and a ruptured aorta, consistent with high-energy impact. The report concluded death occurred at or immediately after the initial impact. Police interviewed all 3 roommates, who provided consistent accounts describing the prank. Investigators considered charges of criminal negligence, but prosecutors ultimately declined to file charges. The university conducted an internal review, and roommates faced disciplinary action. The building management company installed higher balcony railings across all units within 6 weeks, following inspection and guidance to meet current safety code.
It was January 26, 2018, a Sunday morning, at a suburban home in Austin, Texas. The backyard was narrow but well kept, the pool taking up most of the rear section behind the patio. It was already 88 degrees by 10 in the morning. Tate Drummond was 31 and had been watching short-form videos the night before when he came across a prank clip with over 12 million views. A father throws a realistic baby doll toward a pool. The mother reacts in pure panic, and the reveal produces relieved laughter. The comments were full of people tagging their partners. He ordered a weighted, realistic infant doll from an online retailer that same evening. It arrived Friday. He did not tell his wife. I've seen videos exactly like the one Tate watched. Most people have, and the comments are always the same. Hundreds of people tagging their partners, already planning to do it. This felt completely normal to him. That's the part that concerns me. On Sunday morning, he set up 3 cameras, one on the patio pergola facing the pool, one inside the kitchen window, and one handheld. He put their infant daughter, Poppy, in her bouncer in the living room with the baby monitor on and retrieved the doll from the spare room. Zara was outside cleaning the pool with a telescopic brush, her back partially turned to the house. At 10:20 a.m., Tate came out carrying Poppy. Zara told him to take Poppy back inside without breaking her work rhythm. She said she did not want to worry about the baby while she had chemicals out. Her tone was practical. She turned back to the pool. Tate went inside, put Poppy back in her bouncer, wrapped the doll in the same muslin cloth Poppy was usually swaddled in, and went back outside. He waited 4 minutes. Then he shouted Zara's name. She turned. He threw the doll in a high arc toward the center of the pool, shouting at her to catch it. Zara reacted instantly. Her mind registered only one thing: her daughter over the water. She was already running before the doll reached the peak of its arc, her eyes fixed on the bundle instead of the ground ahead. The pool coping rose about 1.5 inches above the patio surface. Her leading foot caught it at full stride. Her momentum carried her body forward while her feet stopped. She did not dive. She did not fall into the water. She went straight down, the full weight of her body driving her forehead into the tiled coping edge before she could bring her hands up. The sound was sharp and immediate. She collapsed face down on the coping and did not move. Tate reached her within seconds. She was unconscious, blood already spreading across the tiles. The doll floated face down in the shallow end as he called 911. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Zara was transported to a medical center with a severe traumatic brain injury, a depressed frontal skull fracture, and significant intracranial bleeding. She underwent emergency neurosurgery that afternoon to relieve pressure and control the bleeding before being placed on life support. She did not regain consciousness. On the third day, scans showed no meaningful brain activity. The damage was extensive and irreversible. Zara Drummond was removed from life support on the evening of the 5th day and pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m. She was 29 years old. The cause of death was severe traumatic brain injury and intracranial hemorrhage consistent with high-force impact on a hard surface. Tate surrendered all 3 cameras to police voluntarily and did not delete any footage. The investigation reviewed the material in full. No charges were filed. The finding noted the absence of intent and the unforeseeable nature of the specific injury mechanism. Poppy was collected by Zara's mother that afternoon and remained there through the funeral and beyond.
It was September 24th, 2019. An Interstate 95 stretched through northern Virginia under afternoon sun, the highway thick with commuter traffic moving at highway speeds. 3 lanes carried vehicles in both directions, separated by concrete Jersey barriers with minimal shoulder clearance. Angela Torres was 42 years old and worked as a commercial real estate agent, specializing in office properties throughout the Washington metropolitan area. She drove approximately 30,000 miles annually for showings and client meetings. Her driving record showed multiple speeding citations over the previous 5 years, and colleagues later described her as frequently distracted behind the wheel, often handling phone calls and reviewing documents while driving. That Tuesday afternoon, Angela was returning home from a property showing with her 16-year-old daughter in the passenger seat. The teenager had been creating content for social media throughout the day, filming pranks and reaction videos as part of an ongoing series. She had recently gained a modest following through clips that captured startled responses from family members. Traffic was moderate, with vehicles traveling around 70 miles per hour in the middle lane where Angela was driving. Her attention was divided between the road and a conversation about weekend plans. The daughter had concealed a compressed air horn, commonly used at sporting events, in her lap while her phone camera remained pointed toward her mother. Without warning, the daughter activated the air horn directly behind Angela's head. The device produced a deafening blast inside the enclosed vehicle, capable of exceeding 110 decibels at close range. The sound was captured clearly on the phone's recording. Angela's reaction was immediate. and involuntary. She gasped and made an abrupt steering input to the left as her upper body tensed. The vehicle drifted into the left lane almost immediately, narrowly missing a sedan that braked sharply. Startled and disoriented, Angela overcorrected, turning the wheel hard to the right. The vehicle swerved across multiple lanes, cutting off several cars. Angela was unable to regain full control as the car continued toward the right shoulder, mounted the narrow edge of pavement, and struck the concrete barrier at an estimated speed of 65 miles per hour. The impact was glancing and angular, redirecting the vehicle into a counterclockwise spin while it scraped along the barrier for roughly 80 feet. The car came to rest, partially blocking the right lane, its front end heavily damaged and the driver's side crushed from prolonged barrier contact. Multiple witnesses stopped and called emergency services. The daughter was screaming, but conscious and able to move. Angela remained in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within 14 minutes as other motorists assisted with traffic control. Angela was unconscious with severe head and chest injuries, and mechanical tools were required to extricate her from the vehicle. She was transported to a regional trauma center where physicians worked for more than an hour to stabilize her condition, but her injuries were determined to be non-survivable. She was pronounced dead approximately 90 minutes after the crash. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury with skull fractures, combined with extensive internal chest trauma, including cardiac contusion, pulmonary laceration, and hemothorax. The daughter's phone, recovered at the scene with the recording still active, was used as key evidence. The teenager was charged as a juvenile and later adjudicated delinquent, receiving detention, probation, and mandatory counseling. The footage was sealed by court order and approved for limited traffic safety education use, while the family fractured permanently in the aftermath. It was November 12, 2018, at an apartment complex in Denver, Colorado. The unit sat at the edge of the complex with a small front porch and a shared pathway. Martin Martinez was 32 years old and worked as a graphic designer in Denver. He shared the apartment with his longtime friend Ethan Torres, who was 29 years old and worked as an accountant. They had lived together for 3 years. Ethan Torres had a severe fear of spiders called arachnophobia. He had been afraid of spiders since he was a child. Friends and family all knew about his fear. Even seeing one spider would upset Ethan badly and cause him to panic. Martin liked to pull elaborate pranks on people. He decided to use Ethan's spider phobia for a prank he was planning. His idea was to fill Ethan's bedroom with fake rubber spiders while Ethan was out of the apartment. Martin thought that after Ethan got scared at first, he would see the spiders were fake and then everyone would laugh about it. Martin ordered 4,000 realistic rubber spiders over 2 weeks. He planned to deploy them on Sunday while Ethan was visiting family. Ethan left Saturday morning and planned to return Sunday evening. On Sunday at 2 o'clock, Martin began placing spiders throughout Ethan's bedroom on the bed, dresser, walls, and floor, adding dim lighting and a lit candle nearby to create a creepy atmosphere. Ethan arrived that evening. He greeted everyone and asked what they were doing there. Martin told him they were just spending time together and suggested Ethan put his bag in his bedroom. Martin and the friends watched as Ethan opened his bedroom door. His eyes registered thousands of spiders covering every surface. His reaction was instant and extreme. He screamed and stumbled backward in pure panic. Martin and the friends expected fear, followed by laughter, but Ethan's phobia overrode rational thinking. Ethan ran toward the living room, shouting incoherently. Martin tried to explain they were fake, but Ethan was not processing language. In his panic, Ethan's arm swung outward as he turned, striking the coffee table and knocking a candle place to create a creepy atmosphere. The candle tipped over and fell against a lightweight synthetic curtain. Fed by wax, smoke began to rise. Martin ran to the kitchen, but had no fire extinguisher. In his panic, he grabbed a dish towel. Ethan froze in place, unable to process what action to take. The friends tried to pull him toward the door, but he resisted, his body rigid. Smoke thickened rapidly as synthetic materials burned. The fire alarm activated at 7:10. Martin filled a pot with water. By the time he returned, the fire had engulfed half the sofa and was spreading fast. Ethan, surrounded by smoke, was overcome by toxic fumes. He collapsed unconscious from smoke inhalation. Firefighters and paramedics arrived and took over resuscitation, while firefighters extinguished the fire. Ethan was transported to the hospital with severe smoke inhalation, carbon monoxide poisoning, and chemical burns in his airway. He was intubated and placed on mechanical ventilation. Despite aggressive treatment, he developed acute respiratory distress syndrome and died. Martin Martinez was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison with 5 years suspended. It was August 17th, 2018. A wide stretch of beach along the Massachusetts coast lay under overcast skies, the sand still dark and heavy from a rainstorm that had passed through overnight. Behind the beach, a line of dunes rose steeply, 10 to 12 feet of packed, wind-sculpted sand running parallel to the waterline. Lysander Ouellet was 20 years old and a college sophomore studying communications. He ran a small but growing live stream channel built around dares, challenges, and reaction content. His following was modest, a few thousand regular viewers, but the engagement was intense. His audience didn't just watch, they directed. That distinction matters a lot, and I think you'll see why. He had a signature format. He'd read a dare from chat, stare into the camera for exactly 3 seconds without blinking, then accept it with a 2-word response his audience had turned into a catchphrase. The 3-second pause was the bit, his most clipped moment, and the reason his chat pushed harder every stream. I watched a bunch of his old clips while putting this together. The kid had real timing. You could see why people kept coming back. His roommate later told a reporter that Lysander kept a whiteboard in his bedroom tracking his subscriber count, checked before and after every upload, sometimes twice. 20 years old, I want you to keep that in mind. He was streaming that afternoon from the beach with 2 friends. The content was loose, no plan, just reading chat. He'd brought a collapsible shovel for a sandcastle bit. Chat had other ideas. Suggestions escalated. Dig a hole, dig deeper, dig a tunnel into the dune. Lysander read the dare aloud, paused 3 seconds, and accepted it. And I swear, when I read that, my stomach dropped. He started digging horizontally into the dune face at ground level, carving out a cavity roughly 3 feet wide. His friend had propped a phone on a cooler about 8 feet away, still streaming. Lysander was 4 feet deep into the dune, his upper body inside the cavity, only his legs visible, when his friend standing nearby noticed the sand above the opening sag downward. He told Lysander to get out. Lysander backed partially out, his torso now visible, and looked up at the overhang above him. The collapse was sudden. A slab of wet, compacted sand roughly 6 feet wide dropped vertically, burying him from the chest down in a single movement. Additional sand flowed in immediately after, settling around his neck. His friends dropped to their knees and began digging with their hands and the shovel. This part was the hardest for me to research, because they did everything right, and it didn't matter. Wet sand is extraordinarily heavy. Each handful they removed was replaced by more settling from above. Other beachgoers ran over, 5, then 8 people clawing at compacted sand around a 20-year-old whose breathing was growing audibly shallow. His chest could not expand against the weight. He responded to his friends' voices at first, short words, strained, then stopped. His eyes closed. The phone on the cooler recorded everything. I haven't been able to shake that recording out of my head. Emergency services arrived roughly 20 minutes after a beachgoer called. Rescue crews used specialized tools to remove the compacted sand. Lysander was extracted approximately 40 minutes after the initial collapse and pronounced dead at the scene. According to the official reports I found, the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be compressive asphyxia. Saturated sand on his chest and abdomen prevented respiratory function. Investigators noted wet sand weighs roughly 130 pounds per cubic foot and behaves unpredictably when undercut. The beach authority installed permanent signage prohibiting dune excavation. His university held a memorial. His roommate told a reporter the whiteboard was still on the wall when he moved out.
It was September 18, 2019, in Seville, Spain. The block sat quiet most evenings after closing hours, bordered on one side by a shadowed alley barely 6 feet wide. A single illuminated sign above the shop's side entrance jutted outward from the brick wall, suspended by 2 aging metal brackets that had been rattling loose for nearly a week. Mateo Vargas was 17 years old and lived 2 blocks from the shop. He had spent most of his teenage years working small jobs around the neighborhood, including occasional weekend shifts at his uncle's garage, sweeping floors and helping with basic inventory. He was considered dependable. Family members trusted him with minor tasks without concern. He had climbed onto the shop roof once before during a previous repair and had not reported any problems. That evening, his uncle Javier had asked him before locking up to bring a couple of friends and tighten the sign's loose mounting bolts before the overnight storm arrived. Just after 10 p.m., Mateo arrived at the back of the shop with 2 friends from the neighborhood, Ivan and Sergio, both 16. They brought a flashlight, an adjustable wrench, and an aluminum maintenance ladder pulled from inside the garage. The streets had already gone quiet. The only sounds were distant highway traffic and the low hum of nearby air conditioning units. None of them brought any safety equipment. The rooftop was flat, but poorly maintained. Loose gravel covered most of the surface in uneven patches. Ventilation pipes and electrical conduit ran in several directions across the surface. The illuminated sign extended roughly 4 feet out from the wall above the alley entrance. To reach the outer bracket properly, a person had to crouch near the roof's edge and lean forward over open air approximately 22 feet above the alley floor. Mateo worked through the upper bolts one at a time while Ivan held the flashlight. Sergio drifted around the rooftop without purpose, kicking at loose pebbles and making noise about shadows in the alley below. The repair took close to 20 minutes and proceeded without incident until the final bracket. The outer bracket continued to shift under pressure. Each time Mateo applied torque with the wrench, the frame moved instead of the bolt threading tighter. He repositioned himself several times, eventually planting his right foot near the roof's edge to get a better angle on the hardware. Loose gravel shifted slightly beneath his shoe as he leaned forward toward the sign frame. Earlier that evening, after watching a football match at a cafe downtown, Sergio had picked up a small portable air horn during the street celebrations outside. He had carried it in his backpack all evening without using it. Standing behind one of the rooftop ventilation units and watching Mateo crouch near the ledge, he removed it quietly. Ivan noticed and said nothing and just chuckled. At this point, all I can say is that this is very dumb. Then he blew it once across the open rooftop. Mateo's body reacted before his mind could process the source. He jerked backward sharply, and the sole of his right shoe dragged across the loose gravel near the ledge. He reached out for the sign frame to steady himself. The loosened outer bracket twisted violently under his grip instead of holding. The entire sign frame lurched outward from the wall. He remained partially upright for less than 2 seconds. Then he went over the edge. The fall was approximately 22 feet onto a concrete alley floor. He landed on his back and right side. He did not move after impact. The air horn clattered out of Sergio's hand and rolled across the rooftop gravel. Neither boy moved for several seconds, then both ran to the ledge. Ivan called emergency services at 10:31 p.m. The call lasted under a minute. He gave the address and said his friend had fallen from a roof. He did not mention the air horn during the call. Paramedics arrived within 9 minutes and found Mateo unresponsive in the alley. He had sustained a severe traumatic brain injury from the impact, along with fractures to 3 ribs, his right clavicle, and his right forearm. He was transported to a hospital in critical condition. Mateo Vargas died the following morning at 7:14 a.m. He had not regained consciousness. Ivan and Sergio were brought in for questioning separately the same night at the local police station. Both were accompanied by their parents. Sergio disclosed the air horn during his interview after initially omitting it from his account. Investigators recovered the device from the rooftop the following morning. Both teenagers were released into parental custody. Mateo's family did not speak publicly after his death. His uncle closed the shop for 2 weeks following the incident.
It was March 2016, and the finished basement of a modest split-level home in suburban Cincinnati had been set up for a poker night. Fluorescent lights hummed above folding tables scattered with chips and cards, while folding chairs lined the walls. The air smelled faintly of beer and microwave popcorn as muted traffic noise drifted in through narrow ground-level windows. Robert Hensley was 58 years old and had spent 23 years managing warehouse operations for a regional food distribution company, coordinating shipments and supervising dock crews across 2 shifts. He stood 6 feet tall with a heavy build, weighing approximately 240 pounds. Friends described him as dependable but stubborn, particularly when it came to medical care. Over the past year and a half, he had experienced intermittent episodes of chest pressure that had gradually become more frequent, but he had not visited a doctor in more than 6 years, dismissing the symptoms as indigestion and work-related stress tied to deadlines and staffing shortages. Poker nights had become part of Robert's routine. Most Saturdays, he met the same 4 friends at rotating homes, rarely missing a game unless work required overtime. That evening, the host told Robert the game would begin at 7, encouraging him to come on time. What Robert didn't know was that 8 additional friends had arrived downstairs nearly an hour earlier, positioning themselves behind furniture and inside a small storage closet. They wore inexpensive horror masks purchased earlier that afternoon. They later told investigators they were only intending to startle him as a birthday surprise before revealing cake and gifts. While waiting, the group drank several beers, growing louder and less coordinated as the hour passed. The basement's layout featured multiple blind corners and a narrow stairwell entrance that funneled sound, creating an enclosed space where sudden noise echoed sharply off the concrete walls. Around 7:15, Robert descended the wooden staircase into the basement. The room appeared empty and dim, except for a single lamp near the far wall. As he reached the bottom step and called out for his friends, all 8 participants emerged at once from their hiding spots, shouting and moving quickly toward him with masks covering their faces. Witnesses later reported that Robert froze in place for several seconds, his shoulders tensing as his posture stiffened. His face drained of color as he staggered backward into the stairwell wall. Both hands moved to his chest as his breathing became shallow and irregular. He attempted to speak, but only a strained choking sound came out as he struggled to remain upright. Within moments, his movements became uncoordinated. He slid down the wall and collapsed heavily onto the basement floor. The sudden shift in tone caused the group to remove their masks immediately. Several friends rushed forward, calling his name and shaking his shoulders. When he failed to respond and no pulse could be detected, emergency services were called. CPR was initiated once it became clear he was unresponsive and not breathing normally. Paramedics arrived within 11 minutes to find Robert pulseless. Resuscitation efforts continued for more than 20 minutes, but no spontaneous circulation was restored, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from an acute myocardial infarction involving the left anterior descending coronary artery, complicated by sudden cardiac arrest due to a lethal arrhythmia. Autopsy revealed widespread severe atherosclerotic disease with several coronary vessels showing critical narrowing. Investigators concluded that the stress response precipitated a fatal electrical disturbance in an already compromised cardiovascular system. Robert's family later filed a civil lawsuit against the host, which was settled out of court, and following an insurance review, the property owner prohibited all future private party gatherings at the residence. It was October 22, 2020, and afternoon crowds moved through a transit station in Portland, Oregon. People checked their phones and sat on benches as speakers announced arriving trains and buses. Tyler Bennett was 19 years old and attended a local university where he studied business. He used social media apps often and watched popular videos and challenges. His roommate later said Tyler wanted attention online and saw strangers as content for his videos. The transit station was a busy stop where buses and trains picked up passengers. About 12,000 people used it each weekday. The station was built in 2004 and had different levels connected by stairs and escalators. The challenge Tyler wanted to film was called the Scare Cam Challenge. The idea was to jump out at strangers or make loud noises while filming their reactions. The trend had started 3 weeks earlier and spread fast online with millions of views. College students and young adults did it to get more followers on their accounts. Tyler had decided to film his own version at the transit station during peak commuter hours. His plan was straightforward. He would hide near the stairway entrance on the elevated platform and jump out to startle commuters as they reached the top of the stairs. He brought his phone mounted on a handheld stabilizer to ensure steady footage and arrived at the station at 4:30 in the afternoon during the evening rush when foot traffic was heaviest. Tyler positioned himself behind a support column near the top of the stairway where arriving passengers would not see him until they stepped onto the platform. He activated his phone's camera, started recording, and waited for targets. Over the next 15 minutes, he jumped out at 6 different people as they came up the stairs. Most reacted with visible surprise and startled expressions. Some reacted with nervous laughter as he indicated the situation was a prank for social media. At 4:47, 65-year-old Margaret Chen was climbing the stairs to the platform. Margaret was a retired accountant who had worked for over 30 years before retiring and lived in Southeast Portland. That afternoon, she was traveling across town to the hospital to see her son and meet her first grandchild, who had been born that morning. She had no known history of heart disease and was considered in good health for her age. At the moment she stepped onto the platform, Tyler jumped out from behind the column directly into her path, yelling loudly and throwing his arms up in an exaggerated gesture. His phone camera captured the entire moment. Margaret reacted instantly, gasping as her body jerked backward. The sudden fright triggered an acute stress response that disrupted her heart rhythm. She lost balance, collapsed onto the platform, and struck her head on the concrete before losing consciousness. Paramedics arrived and transported Margaret to the hospital, where doctors treated her for severe head trauma and cardiac instability. She was pronounced dead at 5:32. Investigators later determined that a stress-induced cardiac arrhythmia combined with blunt force head injury from the fall led to her death. Tyler was arrested and gave a statement to police. 8 months later, a jury found him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. After the incident, the Transit Authority banned all prank filming and increased staff monitoring during peak hours. The footage recorded that afternoon was seized as evidence and never made public. It was December 11, 2015. The commercial district of Dubai hummed with afternoon activity as workers at a regional food distribution warehouse prepared for the weekend shift change. The temperature outside hovered near 75 degrees, but inside the facility's cold storage units, it was a different world entirely. Omar Haddad was a 32-year-old inventory supervisor who had worked at the warehouse for 6 years. He came from a traditional family in Sharjah and took pride in doing everything by the book. His co-workers described him as inflexible and quick to report violations, no matter how minor. Omar's rigid enforcement extended beyond safety protocols. He documented tardiness, criticized packing methods, and had gotten 2 employees written up for eating near inventory zones. His supervisors valued his attention to detail, but his colleagues saw him as self-righteous and impossible to please. The tension had been building for months. That Friday afternoon, 4 co-workers decided Omar needed to be taught humility. They waited until he entered the walk-in freezer during his routine inspection. Walk-in freezers operate at -10 to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, requiring proper PPE and buddy system. Workers must understand that prolonged exposure without gear causes rapid hypothermia, while the heavy insulated doors require emergency releases accessible from inside. Omar had recently filed formal complaints about employees propping doors open and leaving forklifts unattended. Management sided with him each time, creating resentment among the team. As Omar stepped inside to verify temperature logs, they moved quickly. 2 men positioned themselves against the exterior door handle, holding it shut from outside. They planned to release him after 5 minutes, just long enough to scare him. Security cameras outside the freezer captured them, laughing and checking their phones while the door swung inward, showing their grip on the handle and the door slowly closing. The interior camera, designed for industrial cold conditions, recorded Omar moving inside despite the frigid temperature. Inside the freezer, Omar realized immediately what was happening. The metal door remained sealed despite his efforts. The temperature sat at -15 degrees, and his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. He wore only his standard uniform, no cold weather gear. Panic took over as the cold bit into his exposed skin. He rushed toward the interior emergency release mechanism mounted near the back wall. The floor tiles had accumulated condensation from the humidity difference when the door opened earlier. Omar's rubber-soled work shoes lost traction as he rushed toward the release. His feet went out from under him mid-stride, sending him sideways with significant force. His right temple struck the angled lip of a metal storage shelf at full momentum. He collapsed immediately, motionless, with a severe head wound. When the co-workers opened the door 4 minutes later, Omar lay motionless. 1 worker immediately called emergency services, while another attempted CPR. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and declared him dead at the scene. Investigators later confirmed a skull fracture had lacerated the middle meningeal artery, causing a rapidly expanding epidural hematoma that led to death within minutes. Omar's family held a funeral attended by over 300 mourners. They described him as devoted, principled, and meticulous in both work and life. The warehouse conducted a full safety review, installing upgraded emergency releases on all freezer doors and retraining staff on cold storage protocols. The 4 co-workers were charged with involuntary manslaughter. 2 received prison sentences of 4 years each, while the others got suspended sentences and deportation orders. In the months afterward, Omar's death remained a cautionary example in training sessions. It was March 18, 2018, on Provincial Highway 214 in Hunan Province, China. Evening traffic moved steadily as 38-year-old delivery dispatcher Chen Wei drove toward his daughter's after-school tutoring center along a route he followed every weekday. Chen had worked for a regional logistics company for 12 years, coordinating shipments and managing driver schedule. Colleagues described him as the kind of person who ate lunch at the same time every day and drove the exact speed limit. His life revolved around routine, work, family, and the daily drive to collect his 10-year-old daughter from tutoring sessions that ended at 7:30 every weeknight. He drove a 7-year-old sedan that he maintained obsessively, changing the oil precisely every 3,100 miles. Highway 214 was a 2-lane road cutting through mixed residential and commercial areas. Evening traffic was moderate but steady, with vehicles traveling around 37 miles per hour. The stretch Chen traveled featured minimal street lighting and occasional roadside vendors closing up for the night. Visibility was adequate but not ideal once the sun dropped below the horizon. Chen knew every curve and intersection from repetition alone. That evening, 2 of Chen's former classmates were standing at the curb near a fruit vendor's stall, approximately 5 miles from the tutoring center. They'd been drinking at a nearby restaurant for several hours and decided to wait for Chen's predictable passage. One had purchased a realistic rubber snake from a novelty shop earlier that week. Their plan was simple: toss the snake onto Chen's windshield as he drove past, watch him brake or swerve because they knew about his phobia towards snakes, then reveal themselves for a laugh. The fruit vendor later told investigators she saw the two men laughing and heard one say something about timing. Chen's sedan approached at 7:52 in the evening. The street lighting in that section was sparse, and Chen was maintaining his usual speed. The two men waited until his car was close before one threw the rubber snake. Their aim was poor, but the object still struck the windshield directly in front of the driver's seat. The snake hit the glass with enough force to stick momentarily against the wiper blade. Chen's reaction was instantaneous and severe. He flinched and swerved violently to the left, a reflex triggered by his past fear of snakes. He never applied significant brake pressure. Forensic investigators later measured the tire marks, noting the vehicle had traveled only 20 feet along the road as it yawed across into the oncoming lane. A sedan traveling in the opposite direction had no time to react. The two vehicles collided head-on at a combined speed exceeding 110 kilometers per hour. The engine bay collapsed, and the engine intruded into the footwell and upper firewall, crushing the front and deforming the steering column. Both vehicles came to rest in the middle of the road. The driver from the oncoming vehicle, who sustained moderate injuries, immediately called emergency services. 3 other drivers stopped and called within seconds. Paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. Chen was unresponsive when rescuers reached him. The steering column had been driven into his chest, pinning him against the seat. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy confirmed severe blunt force trauma to the chest, including complete fracturing of the sternum and multiple ribs. A traumatic rupture of the thoracic aorta and surrounding vessels caused catastrophic internal hemorrhaging that investigators said would have been unsurvivable within seconds. Traffic investigators recovered pieces of the rubber snake lodged in the wiper assembly, which helped establish the initiating cause of the sudden swerve. Both men who threw the object were identified through witness statements and later charged with crimes related to endangering public safety resulting in death. Authorities classified the collision as preventable, closing the case after the forensic review concluded.
It was March 5, 2019, a Tuesday evening, inside a 2-story brick home in Mississauga, Ontario. The living room faced the staircase directly, separated by about 13 feet of open floor. Ayla Brennan was 17 and had come home from her part-time cafe shift, showered, and settled into the armchair nearest the staircase with a bag of chips and her phone. She was not paying attention to the room. The chair sat close enough to the bottom step that the right armrest nearly touched the newel post. Jackson Brennan was 14 and had been pranking his sister since middle school. He documented everything on his phone, kept most of it in a private folder, and sent some to his group chat. Ayla had complained to their parents twice in the past month. Their mother had told him to grow up. He had nodded and said nothing. Earlier that day, Jackson had found a lifelike baby doll in a box of old toys in the basement. It was dressed in a pale yellow jumpsuit. He laid it flat on the living room floor midway between the television and Ayla's chair, face up with its arms slightly extended. He tied a length of thin nylon fishing line to its ankle, ran the line along the baseboard and under the hallway door, and crouched on the other side with the spool loose in his hands. Ayla had been on her phone for most of the evening. At some point, she glanced up. The doll was moving, short, uneven pulls across the floor toward her chair, the pale yellow jumpsuit shifting with each tug of the line. She screamed and threw herself out of the chair in a single panicked motion, spinning toward the hallway. She did not register the staircase directly behind her. Her heel caught the bottom step while her body was still carrying forward momentum. The stairs took her. She went backward, her body rolling and striking each step without control. Nothing to grab in time to slow herself. She hit the bottom of the staircase with a single hard impact and stopped moving. Jackson came through the hallway door within seconds. Ayla was on her back at the foot of the stairs, one leg twisted beneath her, completely still. She was making a faint, continuous low sound. He called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Isla was unresponsive to verbal commands. Responders identified a suspected spinal injury and immobilized her on scene before transporting her to hospital. She died in the early hours of the following morning. The cause of death was cervical spinal fracture, with complete cord transection and traumatic brain injury sustained during the fall. Jackson was interviewed at the hospital with a parent present. He described the prank in full without being prompted. The fishing line was still tied to the doll when investigators processed the scene. Police completed their investigation and submitted findings to the Crown. No charges were laid, though a victim services report was filed and the case remained on file. The doll was still on the living room floor when the first officers arrived.